I'm an audio only commissioner.
There, okay. Okay, we have a quorum. It's past 5:30. Welcome to those that are online. I'll call this meeting to order. Okay, first thing on the agenda is business from the audience. Anybody have any comments, question? Randy, you have anything to say? Oh, okay, that's a miracle. Okay. Any additions or corrections to the agenda? Okay, there's none. Okay. Next, we're moving right through this. Approval of minutes from the April 21st meeting. They were mailed out or emailed out. Anybody have any questions, corrections, anything else? If not, I'll turn around and entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Come on.
Yeah.
Which one?
Okay. I will move to approve the minutes.
Okay, it's been moved by Abby to approve the minutes of the 21st of April. Is there a second? Seconded by Amanda. Any other discussion? Not, we'll stand the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Okay, is Clint online? I'm assuming he'll turn around and, oh. Okay, we got the thumbs up from Clint. Okay, thank you, Clint. Okay. That has passed. Okay, first presentation tonight that we have is on the Waterfront Urban Renewal District by Michael. Yeah, hit the round disc in front of you, press on the top of it, green. There you go.
Okay, I may need some help with technology. Pat, can you help me if I have a problem?
I'll refer you to Jennifer.
I was just reflecting on the fact that it's, I don't know, 4 years since, maybe 5 since I've been here with the URAC. So some names have changed, but it's good to be back again. I would preface this by simply saying, so you know, that I'm retiring from the Port of the River. So I'm not sure where this discussion will go. I may be part of it, I may not, but it's good to maybe be one more time here and talk about the waterfront. I've been part of this for the entire time I've worked at the port, 16 years. So I'm going to ask for help with getting the presentation going.
All right.
Oops.
How about that?
Yeah, let's get me started.
Looking good?
Yeah,
Looking like you own that?
that's it.
You might pull it over on the other screen.
All right, Jen, we got to share.
Did you hit share screen on
There we go.
yeah, there you go.
In advances.
Yeah.
Gotta click on it.
Yeah, I got you set on the, or you might be able to push this button, but I will.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that technology help. I also want to say I drove from Spokane this morning, so I'm a little rummy. All right. So this is an update on the Waterfront Urban Renewal District. A presentation that was longer than this was also made to the Urban Renewal Board. And the basic question that I'm bringing to you today is to what extent there's reason to look further at options to continue the Urban Renewal District on the waterfront. And we'll get to it a little bit later, but to preview it, the district effectively has reached its maximum indebtedness. And now there's no lifespan for an urban renewal district based on statute now. But once you've met your MI, it's basically over. There's no further purpose, more or less, for the urban renewal district. So there are some options to consider, and for continuing it to complete some of the projects down there. And I presume that the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee, your opinion would be reflected back to the Urban Renewal Board for their consideration. So let me just go through this, and this is a little bit of a look back in history. This is the waterfront. Oops, went too far. The waterfront in 2007. You can see it's before the park. You can see the port's boneyard is located at Portway and 8th. There's been a really significant transformation to the waterfront in the last 15 years. This is a waterfront more or less from today. That number at the bottom is actually low. It's more like $86 million. The base, the assessed value of the real estate within the urban renewal district on the waterfront was about 11 million in 2009 when the district was formed. And like I said, it's now about $86 million. So it's been a really significant transformation, and urban renewal played a part. This district is actually propped up as one of the most successful in the state of Oregon ever. If you look at the leverage from the amount of investment made to the amount of private capital, private equity that came into the district. Sorry. So here's a list of some of the projects. This is more projects that have been completed. This is more focused on what the port has been involved in. And the highlighted projects are ones you can see on the right that were actually loans to the urban renewal agency, which then came back. And there was loans made that came back once the indebtedness or the tax increment was generated. So one of the interesting points about this district is it's never had to borrow money. It's never had to go to the capital markets. It's always been able to use existing funding and then using the tax increment generated to pay back, in this case, the port. I also included the land donation in 2006, which arguably is a big part of what you see on the waterfront. And this is a list of planning efforts over the years. I think there's been more planning per square foot or expenditures on planning per square foot on this waterfront in Hood River on any place in the state of Oregon. There's just been planning efforts that go back decades. And these are the ones that have occurred since 2006. I'm not going to talk about all these, but the upper left, I'll say, is the effort that we did to step back and look conceptually at the waterfront in 2007 and talk about values first and try to determine what the community valued and think about what sort of concepts could be reflective of those values. So it was much different than prior plans, which had a much more specific urban planning sort of approach. And I thought this was a beautiful photo for one, but the work on the Nichols Basin was a strategic decision. There was a significant state of Oregon grant that helped bring this to fruition, but basically setting that edge, establishing the recreational edge, Frog Beach, an opportunity for that continuous bicycle pedestrian path along there, were really important elements to what rationale for getting this done first. There was no, urban renewal did not play a part in this project. But this is the one that I want to reflect on a little bit. The Public Infrastructure Framework Plan, 2018-19, this is getting back just before COVID. This is one that focused on the east end of the district. Call it Lot 1, call it the east end, but it's that large vacant area that sits there today and looks almost the same as it did 30 years ago. And what we were trying to do here was determine more specifically, what's the infrastructure burden there? What needs to be built? Not to determine what ultimately is built there in terms of vertical construction, but in terms of what you would need in basic infrastructure no matter what. And that means streets and sidewalks, it means streetlights, it means sewer and water and electrical infrastructure. And again, it could be for anything. This is a concept plan that you see in the upper right, which is consistent with the urban design that's already been carried out on Portway Avenue. Buildings that are pushed to the street edge, ground floor windows, parking behind in the internal part of a lot or a property, and several others. So what this plan did, tried to identify what those specific projects were, but it it broke it up into basic projects and enhancement projects. Basic were those utilities and the basic infrastructure I mentioned. But I'm starting here with the enhancement projects, which were more along the edge, creating a pedestrian festival street on the north end of First Street, ADA accessibility to the waterfront, repair enhancements, and a variety of other things that would enhance the public experience along that really, really important edge. And importantly, and I'm previewing this, but what you see here is conceptually First Street's moved over. So it's about 80 feet further to the west. And what that does is it opens up another kind of swath of area that at the north end is expansion of the park, and at the south end is an opportunity for some small scale, pedestrian scale sorts of commercial buildings. This concept that you see there was reflected in the waterfront refinement plan, which is now in the city's code. So the zoning code reflects this basic concept. So these are the enhancement projects, and this is a list of them. Again, this comes out of the framework plan, and these are based on community input and based on how to just opportunities for making that a much richer and a much more enlivened and pedestrian-focused spaces. So the basic projects are here. And I'll pause here just to say, here you see First Street moved over, the large curvilinear, it's not a street, it's a pedestrian access way that's an organizing principle for lot one, for stormwater and for utilities and for access. What you see Anchor Way cutting across, or East Anchor Way, that's essentially almost a prerequisite that comes out of the interchange access management plan. There needs to be a second egress point for vehicular traffic that's coming out of the waterfront, not now, but in the future. That's based on traffic projections. And so the East Anchor Way is a have to. Moving First Street over is a really strong want to, because it expands the park space and adds some those more opportunities I mentioned. And then Anchor Way also serves as the potential location for a transit hub. This is a project that's something that CAT is really focusing on as a way to have a centralized location for transit in this community and an interconnecting point for the Gorge Express bus and for White Sand or Mount Adams Express, or Mount Adams Transit, and a location where people can arrive and move around the community via transit. What that does is it provides that location for not only the tourist side, but also it's a location where people that live in other communities but work here have a centralized place to get to, and then get to their place of business. So the list of basic projects is pretty short, but you can see some much higher price points. These are cost estimates that came out of the infrastructure framework plan. They had a 30% increase, and we think they're just about where they need to be right now, despite the CPI increases we're seeing. So the total burden there, $8.3 million. Again, these rolls up utilities, sewer, water, sidewalk, street trees, all of that is rolled up into these project costs. The focus right now that we've been on for a few years now is what we're calling the multimodal street. That's the East Anchor Way, it's the transit center, the public transit hub. This project, we started conceptual engineering, and then we've completed 15% engineering. This is just an engineer's plan that shows what it would look like. In the upper right quadrant is the transit center, a pull-off for buses, a simple transit or a bus shelter in the beginning, but room for expansion. You can see in the darker swaths, that's essentially part of the Green Street Network. So it collects stormwater off the street and cleanses it before it goes out into the river. And this is I'm flipping you around now. Now you're looking to the west, but this is same level of engineering drawings for First Street. So we've completed that. We've updated the cost estimates, and those this combination of projects, East Anchor Way and First Street, are really the core projects to establish the necessary infrastructure there. And they can be done individually, but they're most efficiently and cost effectively they'll be done together if possible. So here's the current cost estimates. Anchor Way and the Transit Center, it's a lower cost project. 1.5 million. We got engineering and CM on top of that. So when you add it all up, those two projects, the most important ones, are about 5.3. Now funding, this shows the where we are in the funding stack, although there's an update. So we have 2 grants in hand, $2 $500,000 grants. And then the port in our current budget's committed to over $1 million contribution. Under potential, the FHWA grant is still outstanding possibility. The CDS grant, congressionally directed spending grant, is still outstanding. In other words, we're not sure yet. And the EDA grant, the slide I showed to the Urban Renewal Board had a $1.9 million number there. And very, very competitive process. We received word a week and a half ago that it was not successful. So we did not get that. So we have a delta of about $3 million to do both together, not to just do one. So how does urban renewal enter in? This is that question about what's, to you, what do you see as the future for the waterfront urban renewal district, if any? This is the outline of the current district. It's 109 acres, goes from the hook and all the way over to the pedestrian bridge. But it's inclusive of all of those properties that we've looked at, including the Nichols Basin. I'm not going to go through this much. You've seen these before, but you have the downtown district, the waterfront, and the heights. How would you describe it? The downtown is the grandfather. I guess the waterfront, sort of a teenager, and the heights is just getting going. So you have districts in this community that are of different age and different durations, and there's different decisions for each one. I mean, clearly for the heights, it's got a long run and a lot of important work to do. But the fourth, the additional one is the potential west side urban renewal district. And that's an important factor that the board is certainly considering, as I know you're aware of. So essentially what we worked with Elaine Howard, who's also the consultant for the West Side. She was also part of the team that did the original study and the original urban renewal plan and report for the waterfront to do just a basic first level assessment. Where are we in the district? And then what are those, conceptually, what are those options? So here they are laid out. The district, you don't really actively terminate it. You just say, there's no more TI, we can't do anything more. And it just basically times out or goes to sleep. What that does is it frees up the whole 109 acres, and that can be deployed on the West Side District or some other use for determined by the council and the board. You also can increase the maximum indebtedness. That's the key number. The MI is basically spoken for. The sewer line, the storm line was the project that the decision had to be made to deploy all the remaining funds for that. But based on the existing statute, you can increase the maximum indebtedness, and it's about $1.8 million. You can do that without, it might be a major plan amendment, but if it stays within that cap, it does not require approval by the other taxing jurisdictions. And that's an important distinction. Under urban renewal statute, you have to, for certain types of plan amendments, you have to make sure the other taxing jurisdictions are okay with it. And okay means, I believe, 75% approval. So there are options to increase the MI in the district, allow it to be deployed on future projects without having to go the major plan amendment. And there's different ways you can do that with an under levy, but you can see under a 2-year, under the current tax increment generation in the district, it would take about 2 years to hit that cap, that cap that doesn't require taxing jurisdiction approval. But then there's other options too. You can increase the maximum indebtedness above that $1.8 million cap. Major plan amendment, effectively, you need to redo many of the steps that were done to do the current urban renewal plan and report. But effectively, if you go above 1.8, then you have to go to your other taxing jurisdictions. I should say we, and make sure they're okay with it. So the big three, of course, are the school district, the county, and the city. And there's lots of other special districts like the port that have a small piece of it, but those are the big ones. And then you also need to consider, or you and the board will need to consider options that look at reducing the size of the waterfront district. Effectively, the central area is done. There's not a whole lot more that you would need to deploy urban renewal funds or tax increment funds for. But if you look at that east end, as we talked about, there's a lot of vacant area, there's a lot of public policy objectives that could be achieved there. And so then you get into a number of different scenarios where you could say we could reduce it by a little, we could reduce it by a lot, and all of that connects back to, and we'll talk about in a minute, to the financial analysis that underpins what each option is. If you reduce the district, let's take the first option, it's 109, you take it down to 20 acres. You're returning that 89 acres, effectively all of that assessed value is being returned to the other taxing jurisdictions. And that's the way urban renewal should work. There should be a point where you say, we invested some money, a lot of private equity came in, the underlying tax base went up, and then at a certain point, that all goes back to the taxing jurisdiction. That's a very significant contribution back to the tax base of other public agencies. But what you're left with is 20 acres, and depending on how you're configuring it, you have to determine what's left in the district. In other words, what's the assessed value of what the small district, and then, of course, how much tax increment would be generated, and how long would it take to generate whatever the target is. So there's different scenarios, we'll see in a second. And then there's another option, which is to say, let the current district go. And I think in that case, you literally terminate it, but then you reestablish a new district. So there's several options. This is just a visual of what variations might be. I think I have the acreages mixed up here, but the one in the upper right would say, let's just keep it, let's include much of the east end, but let's be strategic about what's being included. This one includes the hotel complex, the medical building. The hotel has had a 5-year tax abatement, and that terms out in 22, 23. And then you include lot 1, and you include, in this case, the Jensen property. But you're trying to keep it enough in there that can generate that tax increment into the future. And then there's different variations of that. The one in the lower left is roughly 10 acres. And that would effectively mean the district is only the vacant property that's left. And the interesting play there is that it's a district, and there's an increase in maximum indebtedness, but the repayment mechanism is based on new investment on vacant property. You're not using any of the tax generating assets that are there now. So that gets us to, again, you will have your own considerations, and so will the council, but clearly the acreage for the west side is an important factor. Trying to make available as much as possible to make that as big as possible. It's a factor that I've heard. Of course, that return of the tax base for taxing districts. And then, of course, importantly, and I guess I'm biased, but there are still public policy objectives to be achieved on the waterfront. It's not done. And if you look at lot 1 and you see that big vacant area, yeah, it's good for snow storage and it's good for parking, but there's a whole lot more potential there. Likewise, access the Nichols Basin, riparian habitat, ADA access, and all of those things. So there's a lot of other objectives that could be achieved. And I mentioned the interchange access management plan. So this is one that I believe I used as a way to just generate the discussion, but the question is, and was posed to the council and the urban renewal board, do you want to undertake, is it worth undertaking further analysis of what these options are? And what the port has committed to doing is working with working with the urban renewal board, defining that scope of work and paying for it to take that next step and at least analyze what the options are. So you have a more specific idea of acreage, taxation, increment generation, and what the future would be under different scenarios. There was another scenario which is identified in Elaine's scope of work, which Abigail mentioned, which is, as I understand it, there's still a remaining project at the sewer plant. There's been 2 projects done there. There's another bit of work that needs to be done. And so if the acreage that's left is at the east end, but you want to have a project or the potential for project over at the sewer plant, and this sounds odd, you basically create a cherry stem. And that cherry stem, legally, it has to be connected. You have to be one district, geographically connected, but the connection can be a foot wide. Typically, they're done, the connection is done through the width of a right of way, but you can also do it through a 1 foot extension. So in plan view, you look at the prior ones and you'd see a big chunk over here and you'd see a really thin line and a chunk over there. So the question that I will pose to you for discussion is whether further analysis is warranted to determine if there's a future steps for the waterfront district. I think my last one is that. So what you should have in your packet is not only the report that Elaine generated, that was the basis for much of what we talked about here, but also a scope of work of what she would do, what would be done in that next step analysis. So I think the question is this, and answer any questions you have. It's fairly simple, 5 boundary options, financial analysis of each. Importantly, there has to be a consideration of what are those important remaining projects. Is it East Anchor Way? Is it First Street? Is it ADA access? Is it park expansion? Is it plazas? And what are the ones that are the highest priority? How much do they cost? In aggregate, how much does that mean as a target? What other funding is there? And through that methodology, you ultimately arrive at, again, there's scenarios, but here's the role of urban renewal in those future projects. Here are the priority projects. Here's how much it would take. And that drives back through a scenario. How big's the district? How much MI can be generated? How long will it take from that? So the scope of work was in your packet. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. This would be an iterative process. There's no cost to the urban renewal board or the agency, but it would, and at least I would suggest that it's something that would be valuable for you to consider and the board to consider as a basis for making a decision. Let the district in. Let's go with another option. The total cost is a little over $15,000. So, if there are any questions, I'm here to.
Anybody got any questions for Michael? The original map, I think it was in your presentation, the original maximum indebtedness was 5.75 million. How much of that has been spent, or I mean, what's the word I'm looking for?
Appropriated. I would defer to Dustin or Will, but what I do know is that whatever might be left now, and it might be 1.3 million or so, by direction.
It's in Elaine's thing there at some point.
Yeah,
it's in there. I'm just trying to.
I believe that's about right, but the decision's already been made to deploy that to the stormwater.
So what does the port feel if all the projects between what the city and what the port want to see done at the waterfront, are we looking at, what's the total price tag?
Well, all in, it would be the combination of the enhancement projects, the basic projects, and I believe that's somewhere around $10 million. Now, again, that's a list, an idea list. It's a
Yeah, I
wish
know.
list.
Just trying to figure out what's gonna be the best option, because you've given us several different options of how to increase the maximum indebtedness or other funds, how we can raise other funds, so.
Or just boundaries.
Or,
It
yeah.
just changes the duration of time that it would take to approve that tax increment.
Right, exactly right. So what I would, what the study would do is allow you to see what those options are. So it's an array of if-then scenarios, project lists, and that's what the product of this would be, is a way to make a recommendation and for the board to make a decision one way or the other.
The, refresh my memory of the original maximum indebtedness of that 5.7 million. How much was it to replace or to move that stormwater line is in that amount that's been spent on urban renewal amount?
I think, I have to check this, but I think it's a little over $2 million, 2 to 2.5, something.
So I had a little bit, that's a lot of information. So can you, like, I don't know, make clear how much money, like, is it the $3 million that you're looking for from the, like, or is it as much as you can get, or like what's your goal to, this plan to get from
I don't have a number, but what I do have is a sense or a recommendation, again, a rough recommendation of project. I do know if that EDA grant had been successful, we would have been able to, I believe, fully fund First Street and Anchorway.
Yeah.
So now you've got
that was
the,
the $3 million. So like, if you can,
Yeah.
just, you can just do the urban ordinance, that would be cool, but then there's other more stuff, so sorry, I'm interrupting you.
no, it's okay. Just to finish that thought, it was, now we have a bigger problem. If we had had the 1.9, I think we could have done this without urban renewal money. But then you have the framework in place. You got the street, you've expanded the park space, but now you need a plaza, you need a restroom, you need a connecting path, ADA accessibility. So I would have been suggesting or recommending consideration of more of the enhancement projects, because that's an opportunity to really enhance the vitality and the richness of the waterfront. It's more and more, it's heavily used, more park space, more accessibility, all those things are going to help. Without the EDA grant, it meant now that we're in the hole. And so there's a sort of a bundle of choices. One could say, well, we don't have money to do First Street, so we need to do East Anchor Way. So let's get that transit center, let's get that in place. The downside there is it leaves First Street where it is, and First Street's a pretty decrepit street, and you haven't expanded the park. So I guess under the current conditions, and I don't see on the horizon many large grant opportunities right now. Again, just conceptually, that you should consider an option that just says, let's get that basic infrastructure. We can work on future grants from the state for park improvements, and trails, and repairing enhancements. There's more opportunity for small scale grants in that array. And that, if you drove back to a number, you'd say, again, conceptually, the need is to replace that EDA grant. And that grant application was $2.9 million.
Is that, for me, that kind of influences the, if we do want to keep going this direction, it influences the hows, because of the amount is going to make a difference, like how deep go in the house and over and all that stuff. So
And I mean, I'm sure Dustin can speak more about this, but one thing I'm sure you thought about and considered is if the downtown district goes away, and I'm out over my skis a little bit because I don't know the timing of that or the scenario, but clearly there's been a lot of tax increment generated through that district. And so now if the decision is made that district is closed or ended, that should return a large chunk of money to the taxing jurisdiction. And if you look at that in combination with the reduction of the waterfront district, which will return another tranche of tax base, in combination, I think that's going to be pretty significant. So if you're going to the taxing jurisdictions talking about keeping a portion of the waterfront going, then you're able to say, look, there's a whole lot that's coming off the tax increment tax roll, so to speak.
The amount, what is, maybe Dustin will answer this, what's the amount that the waterfront is taxing or generating with the tax increment side of it
Per year,
per year?
about 800,000. Sorry.
That was the 2-year, that's where Michael's number came up from.
Okay.
His expected, right, forecast.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify that. I'm a firm believer in what urban renewal does. I think the waterfront urban renewal has been very successful. I turn around and I just would like it to continue to be successful and get it completed because you've come a long ways. And that I just don't want to see it. I've always had one of the problems, the Cascade urban renewal downtown, urban renewal has been very successful, but it's ran too long in my book. And I just don't want to see in 30 years or another 20 years, we're still dealing with the waterfront. I'd like to have it back and have that funds back to the taxing district, school, the city, the county, and what little bit the port gets, coming back to them and not overtaxing the taxpayers either. So what you're looking for from us is to make a recommendation to the Urban Renewal Board to fund this $15,000 scope of work with Elaine Howard. Is that basically what you're after? To find what's going to be the best way we move forward?
Precisely. Just to reiterate this, there's no request for funding here.
No.
It's simply a request to say, we're working together on this.
Right.
The port's working with you, working with the board. So that every step of the way here, but it's not a funding request at this point.
I misspoke on that, Michael. We're just wanting to continue since we've come this far. My personal opinion is we should just see what comes up to find out which is the best way to fund the balance of what needs to be done down there, considering with what the city is looking at in establishing a west side urban renewal as well. So
Within Elaine's report, does she have analysis of tax increment projections for the different proposed or possible boundary changes?
Yeah, that's a big part of the scope to project ahead.
yeah, it wasn't in the packet. That's what would be part of the scope of work.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important.
Any other questions for Michael? I guess they.
Can you hear me?
Oh, go
Hello?
ahead. Glenn?
Hello, am I there?
Yeah, you're here.
We can hear you, guys.
Why won't this work? Hello?
Just a second, Clint. Yeah, mine, I leave it on. Probably shouldn't. Okay, are you there, Clint? Are you there, Clint?
If you can hear this, hold your hand up. Ah, okay. I can't hear you guys and talk at the same time. And I don't know why, but it's more important to listen, but to make it short, Michael, thank you for that big summary of the task ahead and the description of what we've been doing. It's helpful, and that was concise. I'm with Pat. I'm a firm believer in what urban renewal money does. And I feel like we've moved from success to success with this. And I also feel like we're on the verge of the hardest part, which is the heights, which is where a lot of the energy is being spent right now. And I think it's the hardest part because it's so close to everyone's homes, and we're going to have the most input and feedback because it's in my backyard, if you know what I mean. Whereas the port is in no one's backyard, no one's across the street. It's not affecting housing, parking, and all that. And my gut feeling is that moving ahead to expand the difficulty is tasking the city and the advisory board and the council with more than they're capable of right now. That's just my gut feeling, and I think I'll have more to say about that as I understand it better. But we've also had a discussion at some length about a fourth tax district to the west, and that again complicates things. So I guess I'm just putting my 2 cents in. My eyebrows are up. And now, hang on, I gotta plug myself in to hear the response.
Anybody have any response to Clint's comments? I have one more question for Michael, though. The question I have, Michael, is as we're dealing in these difficult times with inflation, supply shortages, everything like that, is it something that in Elaine's scope of work that we will make sure that we allowed enough for inflation and cover what the cost potential is? Because like I was noticing in some of the, what we're going to be discussing on the heights, they're putting in a 4% inflation factor, which, currently today is half of what it actually is. And as supply continues to be shortages, this is, we want to complete this, but the longer we can stretch it out, and hopefully inflation comes down and prices come down, that's a decision that the Urban Renewal Board is going to have to make and the port's going to have to make. But I just wanted to make sure, is that something that's going to be part of the scope to get a true handle of what the costs are?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right on target. When we get closer to the point where the URAC is making a decision, making a recommendation, the board's making a decision, we'll true up those numbers and look at inflation and project ahead. I think we're assuming the cost estimates included a construction date or construction year of 22, 23. So that does have to be, but that does have to be projected ahead further, probably with a higher number. If I could ask one question, Mr. Harris, I wasn't sure if he was asking a question about the waterfront district. Was there a question there that I should
No,
respond to?
I think he was just making a statement in regards to that, because we're dealing with the heights, which is consuming a lot of our time.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
I hope I corrected that correctly, Clint.
I'm trying to chime back in. You hear me?
Yeah.
It wasn't specifically a question, but it is a concern to just keep it going forever or keep expanding the separate districts and for not the least of which are Pat's concerns about inflation going up and supply chain and all that. I mean, it's affecting everybody on a weekly basis in unforeseen ways. And I think construction's no different, but yeah, I need to reflect on it more to make a concise statement about it all. So I'll sign off again.
So Dustin, what you're looking for is this committee to make a recommendation to the Urban Renewal Board to go with the scope of work with Elaine, or is that just something they're gonna already decide?
Well, city council technically will be, based on the scenarios, would be the decider, but I think, you know, anything that comes from you all, are there things that?
Well, I guess
that
based
the
on,
advisory board wants to, should they consider? You know, any sentiment that you have, be it recommendation, be it facts, be it issues, similar to what we're gonna talk about. With the heights is what, as the advisory group, what advice, what advice do you have for that decision-making body to contemplate from your lens, from your perspective? So be it recommendation or issue
I
identification.
guess, what does the rest of the committee that's here and Clint feel that they should move forward with the work with Elaine?
I think there still needs to be some culminating.
Find out which option is the best.
Correct, yeah, just, support. Sort of tying up the loose ends in the waterfront, making that a cohesive and complete urban renewal district, but
Amanda?
Yeah, I feel like. Yeah, I don't know if I don't think it's a bad idea to like. To have this, report created for sure. I also just want to be mindful of like spending money, so if we really know that we don't want to continue the waterfront, then don't spend money on a report that we're not going to continue. So I guess. But if you want to, if everybody really does want to explore more waterfront work, then I think it would be really valuable to.
Clint, do you have any additional comments?
Yeah, I think identifying exactly what we want the consultant to answer is critical. And if it's just a check of where we are, I question the cost of that. And if it's for a specific purpose of, do we want to pay for this, figure out a way to do it, then we need to agree that that's something we want a professional answer about before we spend a big chunk of change on it.
I think the biggest thing is scope. When I sit and look at what Elaine prepared and read that synopsis, I sit there and look at her scope of work. It's going to basically be trying to find out which option, which Michael discussed several different options, which one's going to be the most beneficial and achieve our goals for the total waterfront. I think that's what the urban renewal or city council need to decide, and have Elaine, be able to put that together so the city council or urban renewal board and the advisory committee can look over to find out which way is going to be the best way to proceed. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank Michael for his presentation.
yes, Michael.
And this is one of your last public ones, isn't it? You're retiring next week or in a couple of weeks?
A couple of weeks, yeah.
Yeah, so it's been always a pleasure having you make presentations to this committee. So thank you for your tenure with the board.
Thanks, Pat. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So
16 years?
16.
16 years.
So, well, now we'll move on to the next one, urban renewal administrator with Dustin. And looking at the clock, you got 5 minutes. No.
Excellent. That's music to my ears. I'm a consultant online who is under contract, but also hourly. So 5 minutes goes, this should be great. So, we have Nathan Polanski here from MIG, APG MIG now, who is part of the project team and project manager. We're going to go over a memo. Not all 350 pages, but a summary of the memo that you have in your packet from last week. This packet will go to the Urban Renewal Agency Board. much like this effort, we're going to make a presentation to you about some of the findings, really that are summarized in the first 10 pages, and look for some direction from you all, and again, advice and or thoughts, things that you want the agency board, when they consider this, to take with them. So raising issues, either in the memo, with the memo, in addition to the memo, things that we want to make sure the agency board has before them as they have to contemplate this request and take final action on it. So I'm going to MC for Nathan here, which I think Nathan has a presentation ready to queue up, depending on how technology works.
Yes, well, all set. Thanks, Dustin. And maybe before we get started, I would just ask kind of the advisory committee. Hopefully you've had a chance to read the first 11 pages of the summary, phase 2 summary memo. A lot of the appendices, well, the bulk of it was work that we've talked about previously. A couple of the appendices are the summaries from the relatively recent open house and online survey. And so maybe a first question before I get started, and just kind of to think about in the background, are there any questions that any of you had about the summary memo and the kind of summaries of the online survey and open house before I sort of kind of do our overview of the findings?
Anybody got any comments? Everybody read the 350 pages? Let's put it this way, I skimmed it. I never slept so good after reading it, but that was fine. Some very good information there, Nathan. I printed out a couple of pages of things that I felt how you summarize things were very well. Plus, reading all the survey comments that people made that you had at the end of the report was very helpful. Considering some of them were positive and some of them were negative, I think it was about 50-50, wasn't it?
It was probably pretty darn close.
I will just say I've been offline and disconnected from society for a few days, a big chunk of days. So, and then when I got back, I've been very busy, so I have not had a chance to read it.
Okay.
So, I don't have any questions, but I also don't have much back.
Floor is yours, Nathan.
Okay, great.
One thing, Nathan, before you jump off on this, I also wanted to take an opportunity to thank you all for investing your time in this. I think a big part of this is also had to do with your act's willingness to commit to being at the meeting, spending time with the community, all the service that you did. That is something that I think is hugely important in this. And, it's really shouldn't be, for the record and not to be understated, that commitment from you all was really, really instrumental. Not necessarily, it's not going to show up in the summary, but in terms of the outcome and the reason why this was so successful has a large part to do with your commitment. So I wanted to thank you from a project team perspective and for all that you all did to lean into that and serve food and entertain and do all the logistics. That I think made this a pretty special event for the community and really reflected the success I think that we saw there. So sorry, without further ado.
Absolutely agree, Dustin. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and kind of spend 10 minutes or so walking through. Okay, hopefully my screen is visible for you guys. All right, so tonight, we really want to kind of go back and talk briefly about some of the technical evaluation that we talked about several months ago that was completed prior to the community outreach and feedback. I want to do sort of a light dive on some of the findings and kind of the feedback that we got from the open house and the online survey. And we've spent a lot of time kind of sifting through all of that feedback and kind of working through and thinking about how the last year and a half of the process that we've worked through with you and with the agency board and the community starts to inform what we see as sort of a recommendation for a framework to build on during phase 3 and developing a preferred design. So from a schedule standpoint, phase 1, we spent time working with the community, kind of having some stakeholder meetings. We had goal setting, really kind of establishing the foundation of knowledge for our team and also the foundation to build on as we started to develop concepts. Over the last 8 or 10 months, we've kind of developed the initial design concepts, evaluation criteria. We've refined both the evaluation criteria and the concepts based on feedback from the board. We had a parking study. We've evaluated the concepts and we've had our community outreach. And so, we're at the end line here, potentially for phase 2. Looking forward, after a preferred design concept or kind of basis for a design concept has been identified, we'll be looking to move forward and developing a final concept and action plan that identifies sort of phasing opportunities, cost considerations, and kind of how that integrates with some of the other kind of below ground infrastructure that we haven't talked about yet, but is really some of the kind of initial needs that were identified in the urban renewal plan. Now, real quick, just reminding you guys kind of what were the kind of design concepts that we're talking about. So design concept 1, we looked at converting the heights from one-way traffic today to two-way traffic and adding bike facilities along 13th, which would remove parking. Concept 2 preserved the one-way traffic on 12th and 13th, but reduced the lane of traffic and really tried to create more space for walking and biking, as well as more opportunities for gathering spaces, street trees, planting, kind of other kind of non-vehicular spaces. And then that says concept 1 again, but that should be concept 3, and it's a hybrid. And that's the one where 13th really becomes more of a corridor for moving people through cars. Kind of becomes probably more of a sort of regional route, and then kind of 12th Street becomes kind of the one-way street with angle parking and the two-way cycle track. Each of these concepts included different approaches for intersection design that were not necessarily exclusive to that concept, and they were kind of presented as options. So those are kind of a quick reminder and recap of the concepts that we took a look at. From a regulatory environment, I think it's important to remember that both 12th and 13th today are state highway DOT right of way. And so ODOT maintains the roadway from curb to curb, and the city maintains the sidewalks, the kind of the drainage infrastructure, lighting, snow removal, and kind of things that are happening outside of the curb. As we met with ODOT through this design process, one of the things that became apparent is that if the traffic patterns change from sort of that one-way circulation that happens today, and there are two-way traffic or some combination of two-way and one-way, like the hybrid presented, is it is likely that ODOT would not feel the need to or want to keep both 12th and 13th as a state highway, and so they would kind of focus on maintaining one of those, and the other one will likely be taken over by the city. And that's something that hasn't been discussed in detail, but had come up, and just I think it's important to kind of remember that as sort of the kind of regulatory environment. So 3 or 4 months ago, we were talking about the technical evaluation. We had identified our project goals in phase 1 and identified 3 to 6 evaluation criteria to go along with each of these. The design concepts had been evaluated by the project team. All of them generally aligned well with the project goals. There were, I think, design concept 1 rated more consistently in alignment with project goals. But I think what's important to remember, and this came from feedback both from the advisory committee and the board, is let's not look to the evaluation criteria did not add any weighting to any of the criteria. So these were all a 1-for-1 evaluation. As we went through that, our kind of design team really tried to dig into some of the differences in the scoring, looking at them across both concepts, looking them across kind of individual streets within a concept to identify what some of the key differences were identified during that technical evaluation. And the 5 things that are listed here were sort of highlighted as things that we wanted to talk more about with the community and really focus on as we're looking for feedback from the community, from you guys, the advisory committee, and also the agency board. And so, what level of congestion can be tolerated? We've talked about how all of these concepts will reduce the level of vehicular service that's going to be provided in the future and try to provide a more balanced environment for people walking, biking, and driving. We've talked about the design of key intersections is really significant in the way that they support their operations, but also impact the surrounding environment. Parking has been something we've talked about from the start. So, there's different ways that these impact parking. The one-lane streets really didn't function very well from a traffic analysis standpoint. And then really thinking about those future bike connections, looking east and west on May Street to the schools and also to the south, kind of beyond our project study area, and kind of how those align with safe route to school recommendations. So those are some of the key things that we had identified coming out of our technical analysis. Looking at kind of a couple of key traffic items, that congestion in the design concept 1, two-way, 2-lane traffic rated the best out of the 3 concepts. Design concept 2 with 1 lane in each way really rated poorly. And design concept 3 was somewhere in the middle. It might feel a little counterintuitive that in design concept 3 for traffic congestion, that 13th and rates kind of shown here sort of more on the orange boundary. And I think what's unique about design concept 3 is the split of traffic really changes. And so where in design concept 1, 50-50 traffic might split between 12th and 13th. And in design concept 2 with 1 lane traffic, the circulation doesn't change, but a lot of the traffic is shifting to 13th. And so that sort of weights down or brings down that sort of traffic level of service, and it kind of increases the congestion on 13th. On the right side, traffic calming. This was a key component of several of the goal statements, but particularly goal statement number 1. And so I think it's important to highlight this as well as we talk about traffic congestion and in general. And it makes sense that all of these generally align quite well with the design concepts, align well with the goals to provide traffic calming. I think the outlier is the design of 13th Street on the hybrid. That is the corridor where there's 3 lanes of traffic. And so, it's a wider street, longer street crossings for people. And so they're something that, doesn't align quite as well with the goals. And there are some things that we think can be done to mitigate that, but want to kind of highlight that as, a key thing that we've talked about throughout this process from traffic calming. Parking. This bar chart shows the number of parking stalls on 12th and 13th, and within what we'll call the Heights District or study area, which is 1 block east or west of 12th and 13th. So light blue is on 12th and 13th, dark blue is off of 12th and 13th. And so you can see at the top, parking today is somewhere above 400 parking stalls. The 2011 Transportation System Plan, which is the current adopted plan, reduces that by, roughly 40-ish%. And compared to the design concepts that were developed, reduces parking the most. So I think this is just kind of a good visual graphic to kind of show where the TSP is, and that, one of the things that we strive to achieve is how can we improve the parking condition from the future plan. And design concept 2, which has the most preserved parking of these, really reflects that, we've taken space away for driving cars and we're trying to balance it with parking and walking and biking.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Does the within 1 block include if we change the parking on the side streets between 12th and 13th, or is that not?
Yes. Yeah, so that includes the spots in between. So as part of that kind of fairly kind of, I would call it a parking study light or a light parking study. Our team, DCAS as a traffic engineer, went out and did an audit of the existing on-street parking stalls. And so we had a count of all the stalls that are on 12th and 13th, in between 12th and 13th, and then within what is sort of a block to the east and west of 12th and 13th. And so this total count includes those.
Right, but like the
And-
plan is to change, like, or we've talked about changing to angled parking between 12 and 13.
Correct.
This includes.
Yes.
If we did
That is not. So this assumes that all of those are the same condition and they're sort of the same condition as existing. So there could be an opportunity as we start to dive into the developing a preferred design. How can we squeeze more parking out of those blocks in between?
So there's more potential for the dark blue to be bigger on all those than it is currently.
I think there could be. And one of the when we get into kind of actually laying out parking stalls, it's a narrow right of way. There's an alley in between, there's some driveways. And so it's always a bit of a balance of like, how can we best use that space to generate the most parking? And that's what we have heard as a goal, recognizing that all of these design concepts reduce parking from today. Does that answer the question or help?
Yep.
Okay. So one of the other items that we did in addition to the technical analysis is kind of reaching out to the emergency responders for feedback on the preliminary design concepts. And these were meetings we had just in advance of the public open house. And we spoke with the Hood River County Sheriff, the city fire department, city police department, and we also reached out to West Side Fire, and they did not participate. But some of the key takeaways from our perspective that we heard, the one-way streets on 12th and 13th really are not desirable for emergency access. If this was a local or neighborhood street, that might work okay, but recognizing the kind of broader, call it regional area, the 12th and 13th serve, that was identified as pretty undesirable. We fielded several questions about the raised bike lanes in each of the concepts, and when those were located next to the roadway, are there ways that we can kind of design those or consider making them potentially, as needed during emergency access, like potentially mountable for fire or police, so that they can kind of have a little more space to kind of work with as they're responding. The traffic signal at 13th and May, I think we've talked about this a lot throughout the process and heard early on that there are a lot of concerns with the traffic signal at 13th and May, stopping vehicles and the challenge with trucks getting stuck on the hill. And it's something that was reiterated by the emergency services officials. And then the one other item that was brought up from the fire department was just kind of some questions related to the angle parking on 12th and the height design concept 3 and kind of how fire access would be provided. And, ultimately, and Dustin, feel free to chime in here, but, as the Heights redevelops, the expectation would be that those buildings are being sprinklered for fire prevention, in line with current building codes, and that sort of conversation helped to ease to some extent the fire marshal's concerns or questions. So that was kind of a quick recap on some of the, I think, high points from the technical evaluation. We spent a lot of time the last 3 months planning for, preparing for, and executing kind of a public engagement program. City staff did a phenomenal job with the social media outreach. Dustin, I know, spent an afternoon or two kind of walking out, knocking door to door and making sure, to the extent that we could kind of alert all of the business owners and property owners that, we're going to be having the open house, and kind of making sure they were there and kind of providing flyers. The website, we got a handful of comments through the website, but, as Dustin mentioned earlier, I think this was a very comprehensive and kind of good kind of team effort to kind of really get the community turnout. And I think that is reflective in the kind of participation that we had. as Dustin mentioned, thank you guys all for kind of contributing to the kind of getting food and drinks there and the organizing and the setup and walking people through the 2 days of open house. We had, probably close to 300 people come through. We had interpreters on hand for the full duration of the 2 days for Spanish speaking participants. On the online survey, we also got a lot of feedback. Over 1,000 people at least opened the survey link and kind of responded to one of the questions. And we had over 300 people go through the entire online survey. If you recall, during phase 1 of the project, when we were initially kind of getting feedback on issues and opportunities and identifying goals, we had posted the survey in English and Spanish, and we didn't have any complete responses from the Spanish language survey. So it was great that we had 21 people fully complete the survey in Spanish this time. I think you guys recall seeing the big roll plots that we had by the end of the night. There was a lot of feedback that went in from the community, and someone mentioned it earlier. Pat, I think you might have said it. You could probably say that there was a 50-50 split a lot of times when we were getting feedback on different things, and it definitely makes for a more interesting kind of review and evaluation and trying to work through all the feedback. But really good feedback and participation. A couple of images, pictures just from the event. We had a really good turnout. And here you can kind of see standing up on the stage and seeing all the people that were walking through, and the backup of people just waiting to walk through. And it's really great to see community members talking to each other, people that live in the Heights talking to people that live, don't live right in town, and giving an opportunity to hear people talk about their issues and concerns, and being very generally, I would say, very polite and respectful of each other. Some of the key things that we took away from kind of, I guess probably mostly I would say from the written comments, rather than trying to suggest that the conversations that we had in person with people, but there did seem to be a preference for a roundabout over a traffic light at 13th and May. Sort of at the other end of the corridor, there was a lot of concern, or at least loud concern, from some residents and kind of business owners about the property impacts and kind of business impacts at the Belmont intersection. Parking continued to be a hot topic. People didn't seem too excited about the idea of going back to two-way traffic, and there were some questions related to, well, it used to be two-way and it got changed. Why would we go back? Winter weather conditions were brought up in terms of the intersection at 13th and May that we talked about, and also, how frequently are people going to be using bike lanes during the winter? The other bike question was related to, 12th and 13th, the best corridors for biking. Is there a parallel route that might be considered or should be considered? And unfortunately, given the street grid in the Heights, there isn't a good, easy parallel bike route. We also showed some images of different streetscape environments, and some of the takeaway that we had from that, and sort of people putting dots on pictures, was this appeared to be more of a desire to use contemporary materials and really incorporate kind of local culture and character, which I think aligns with some of the goals, one of the goals that we discussed, reflecting the Heights and the things we've been talking about. From the online survey, there was, a fairly even split to some extent, a slight preference for concept 3, and maybe not even split, but there was a preference for concept 3, but definitely not a majority. Of the 300 plus responses, one of the things we were able to do was to divide the results and the feedback based on where people live. So as part of the online survey, if you remember, people were able to, at the end, put a pin on the map to kind of show where they lived. And so we were able to isolate those based on people that live in the Heights and don't live in the Heights. And interestingly, just looking at preference by concept, there wasn't any key differentiation based on where people lived and their preference for a design concept, which is different than we saw in some of the other results. One of the questions we asked was, what are the key differences you see between the concepts? And we asked about on-street parking, traffic calming, traffic congestion, safe routes to school, walking and placemaking. And I think it's probably going to be hard to see. The black arrow represents the average rating from 0 to 100. So all the way to the right on the speedometer is good alignment with that issue. And then in smaller arrows, blue is for respondents that did not live in the Heights, and the kind of darker blue or purple is people that do live in the Heights. And what was interesting here is you can see with the traffic calming in the top middle, there's an average score of 59, but there was a fairly big difference between people that live in the Heights and don't live in the Heights and the importance on that. So people that live in the Heights felt traffic calming was, call it 8 points more important than the 59, whereas people that didn't live in the Heights felt it was less important than the average. And the other one that had more of a range between the scores was the comfortable places for walking. And I think, as one might expect, people that live in the Heights felt comfortable places for walking was more important than the average, and slightly less so for walking. Otherwise, safe routes to school, traffic congestion, and walking were all, identified as more important differentiators, and placemaking was sort of identified as sort of the least important differentiator. One of the other things that was not related to the public engagement, but was talking about roundabouts, and the city was able to hire a third-party kind of roundabout specialist to take a look at the two layouts that have been developed as a part of the design concepts, and based on the outcomes of the traffic analysis, really build those out to more accurately reflect the footprint that would be required to do that. And so what these show is, compared to the design concepts that I think, or maybe once we kind of built in the traffic analysis, there needed to be some additional lanes to maintain a decent level of service and not have things fail at the intersections. And so here at 13th and May, there are 2 lanes that go southbound on 13th through the intersection. And on the east leg of the intersection on May Street, there's a second lane for the free right. And so this really refinement that reflects the traffic analysis really increases the footprint of this. And you can see here in dark lines the kind of potential right-of-way impact and where a potential future right-of-way might need. And on the southeast corner, you can see 3 parcels that are significantly impacted, and then another smaller one and kind of the northeast corner. And so I think what's important to take away from this refinement based on the traffic analysis is that the build out of roundabout at 13th May is really going to be a kind of significant cost and right-of-way impact. And there was kind of split level on support from the community, with slightly more support for those that live in the Heights. Similarly, at the south end of the study area, and we looked at kind of that double roundabout. Here's a different configuration, and Dustin worked with the consultant to kind of come up with a sort of a different configuration that really tried to not impact the Armory property, to kind of keep the feds out of the picture, but then also to protect the bar here. And you can start to see the footprint, and this is just kind of a different approach to the layout, but you can kind of see the number of parcels that could potentially be impacted with a implementation of a double roundabout here at the south end. So, kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of full parcels, kind of a big chunk of this parcel, and then smaller impacts in places.
Can I ask another
So,
question?
yeah.
So the dark black lines, like on this one and the other one, maybe like where the other one, if we can go back where it goes into the park, because that's an easy thing to see, and like, so that's not where the road goes, but
Correct.
so what does that mean for that area between the road and that land in the park? Like, does it get destroyed? Does it have like?
No, my guess, and I don't know Dustin if he's had more conversations with the kind of third party reviewer. My hunch is that one of the things that these concepts don't take into consideration is topography, and that has the potential to potentially more grading and kind of retaining walls. But I would imagine that this kind of additional setback along the park is probably allowing for just kind of a transition of grading down and recognizing that it's city property to kind of make that. So I would say that, some of the vegetation that's along there is impacted, but I don't know that it doesn't kind of, in my mind, mean this is not usable park space or open space.
Yeah, and then like, obviously there's a lot where it's like private property or whatever, so that, but it doesn't necessarily cut into the building, so yeah, I'm just confused about that.
Yeah, when you construct an intersection project or any road projects, we're gonna look at not only, in this instance, the final outcome, but constructability. So Nathan mentioned topography is having potential impacts, but we will also need to have some level and some real estate available to queue equipment to actually construct the project. And then, so that is, when it comes to proposed right away, it anticipates that. It also is going to anticipate some, probably some maintenance space, not just maintaining right to the curb, but the ability to go outside of that. And on the north side, in this particular instance, I think it also contemplates maybe future changes to add or reduce a curb improvement. So it really kind of captures not only the project, but some of those other feasibility, call it feasibility pieces, constructability, maintenance, and just in this 3D world of Hood River we live in, grade changes that can impact that as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mentioned earlier sort of kind of the reminder of the kind of current regulatory environment is, 13th is an ODOT corridor, and I think I would imagine that this would continue to be maintained by ODOT, but that's something that would have to be, talked through as the kind of design and kind of further coordination happens. One of the other things just to kind of remind people is that the existing intersections, something needs to happen because they don't work from a traffic level of service, and so they don't function ideally now. And as traffic grows, the volumes grow in the future, they're projected to fail from a level of service standpoint. But they also don't work for people walking. They're not safe. They don't provide ADA facilities. They also don't provide bike facilities through these intersections. So I think it's important to remember that sort of a do nothing doesn't really work, because there need to be improvements to address those items. Any other quick questions on, or not quick questions, questions on the roundabouts while we're here? Okay. So taking all of that feedback, kind of sifting through the kind of technical analysis, really kind of thinking how the design concepts align with the project goals, going back to the original technical evaluation based on the things that we heard from the community at the open house, that we read from Post-it notes, the feedback that we got from the online survey, breaking it down by people that live in the Heights, that don't live in the Heights, really getting into all of that detail. We feel that there's sort of a base foundation that starts with concept 3 to kind of move forward to preliminary design. I think one of the things that is challenging with finding kind of a perfect solution is there's so much kind of mixed views on what's needed, and concept 3, the hybrid, really tries to balance that by providing sort of more of a local community street with angle parking on 12th and kind of the 2-way bike lane, and deprioritizing people to some extent walking along 13th, and kind of making sure that we're also accommodating kind of the vehicular needs. So the project team's recommendation is to kind of start with the hybrid as a base, but based on things that we've talked about, really looking for some refinements in the following places. We talked about the east-west streets earlier, and so I think really looking to how can we increase the amount of on-street parking that's provided along those east-west streets without compromising the important, Pine to Taylor east-west connections and A to Wilson. I think those east-west connections for people walking and biking are still really important and shouldn't be compromised for parking. But on B and C, we really are there ways that to some extent we can kind of stack parking and kind of configure those to work well. I mentioned going back to the traffic calming slide, and actually I'll just see if I can flip back up real quickly. Down here, 13th did not rate as well for traffic calming on design concept 3, and it really speaks to the three lane cross section. And so flipping back down to here as we're sort of talking about recommendations, I think an important part of developing a preferred design for 13th is really focusing on ways that we can improve that kind of walking environment for people who are traveling along 13th, and really looking to, what are the tools that we can use through, reducing turns places, kind of incorporating medians where we can. How can we have a consistent buffer between the sidewalk and the travel lane on the east side of the street where there's not parking right next to the curb? So in the future, if this recommendation were to move forward, cars are right next to the sidewalk. And so how can we create that buffer? Really working with kind of the emergency access providers and kind of thinking with the bike community, and how can the design for bike lanes help to balance the needs for access during those emergency responses. Looking to build on the bike connections outside of the project area, to the south and to Indian Creek Trail, and particularly depending on the intersection designs that are selected, is how can we review and kind of design to provide the kind of most comfortable and experience for people walking and biking through key intersections. Incorporating placemaking and gathering spaces. How can we plan for those community events, whether it's on side streets, along 12th, where are the places that we can kind of create those variety of scales and opportunities to engage with your neighbors and community members. And then the big one that is kind of really determining whether roundabouts or signals are most appropriate. And given the property and cost impact, we really feel this is a decision that needs to be made by the board. And kind of going back to the design concepts don't rely on a specific intersection configuration or approach to make a concept work, and signals and roundabouts could work in either. And so I think that's a big piece of the next discussion. And so that's the presentation that we had prepared. As Dustin mentioned, we're looking to identify issues to raise to the agency board and or recommendations from the advisory committee. And I think the thought of, is building on a framework that starts with concept 3, the hybrid, something that would be supported by the advisory committee. Thoughts on intersection treatments, design refinements that should be included with a recommendation for moving forward with the design concept. So those are some of the things that I'm kind of looking forward to getting your thoughts on. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open it up for discussion. And Dustin, if there's anything you want to add or you feel that needs more explanation, I'm happy to try to provide it.
Mr. Chair?
Got any?
No, we're here for you. We tried to walk through, that's the short version of 350 pages and 4 months of work. But I think that last slide really kind of takes into account, is based on what you've seen. What does the Urban Renewal Agency Board need to consider when trying to take this on? And really, I think, thanks Nathan for starting with the process calendar page. This is really the big 3-phase project. This is not the end of the project. It is really starting to look at the foundation to build the final design from. So with that in mind, we certainly, there's still work to do. I think we had a nice bullet list of things that we've already identified as must go into a preferred design or refinements that are still necessary. So you're just kind of using that as a reflection point for you all. Are we getting it right? Are there more things? Again, when we go speak before the decision makers, how can we equip them to make the most informed and best decision they can, given this task that we have?
Andy, you got any questions? Since this
Think
is,
about it for a minute.
okay.
I have to go first.
No, well, I just thought I'd, switch between the two before I get to Clint. Abby, you got anything at this time?
I think that I would need some time to sort of mull over. I do like all the feedback that was gathered, and it's a very thorough analysis of all the community input. I think that the sort of recommendations on the features to be incorporated into the next phase of the design concept are really good. I would want to sort of just like mull over the map a little bit more, I think, but I think it's.
There's a lot of information we were given in that, so. yeah.
There is absolutely a lot.
Clint, what do you got? Comments?
Thank you. Raise a hand if you can hear me, so I'm not talking to myself. Thanks. Nate, I just want to say mostly I'm so impressed with the amount of work that you guys have done. And I thought that the open house was quite successful. The feedback was really good. I had this funny thought driving home that the same people that were so vocal against any new change were probably the same people that were vocal against the change when it went to one-way streets a long time ago. But I feel like that summary was so well done. That's going to really help me with conversations about moving forward with the community members and with staff and my wife and everyone I know that's talking about this for years. So it's really, really helpful. And you guys have just done a very thoughtful, dispassionate job of collecting all this information and making it palatable and understandable for a layman. So I really appreciate that. It's probably premature to pick one for me. I'm definitely in favor of the more high-reaching phase 3. But as far as like committing to that, I'm not going to do it yet. And I like the idea that maybe that I'm much more in favor of roundabouts over anything else, but I think having the option to get the job done with another mode of traffic control is nice to hear that too. So over and out.
So now I guess as chair, I get to have my say. So first of all, Nathan, excellent job. I was very happy with the turnout. Believe me, I've heard a lot of comments since that meeting. A lot of it I've known by a lot of people in the community. I heard a lot more negative than positive. Why do we need to change things like that? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and it was getting difficult, some of the things that I was hearing. And it was what I did review in the 350 some pages that we had was read your 11-page summary. I thought the page 11 that was in page 50 of the packet talked about cost. The other one that I thought was very interesting was on page 333. It was 2 of 11, was the key themes. I thought that was very nicely done. And I think that captured a lot of what you got in the surveys. I did read all the comments from the surveys and all the comments made at the open house. And like I said, it's 50-50 in my book. I don't know, you got a better handle on that, I'm sure, Nathan. I do have some concerns, and I want to take a little walk down memory lane as being one of the senior members that was on the original thing when we established the urban renewal on the Heights. I remember it vividly. It was the summer of 2011. And I'm not trying to throw a wet blanket on all of this, but the situation was we felt the purpose of the urban renewal was to improve the pedestrian traffic, make it safer, dress up the Heights with sidewalks and better crossway whatever. And now it's become all about bicycles and traffic flow. So it's kind of moved away from its original objective. Well, in the process, we have maximum indebtedness of $8.6 million or 8.3. I can't remember the exact amount. I was doing some research, talking to people, like when they did this, I was talking to the mayor of Hood River at the time that we did the cascade down here, and they figured the cost to do a block was $1 million a block. I was talking to some other people in the business now, they're saying it's $2 million a block. Well, we got 12 blocks on the Heights. Well, you sit there two, I think it's closer to 2.5. So you're looking at $30 million. Okay, well, now we got inflation and so forth that's going on. You can add another 10% to that. So I'm sitting there looking at, it's gonna cost $40 million to do what we're wanting to do on the Heights. And your page 50 come in with design 1, a low to high of 26 to 33, design 2, 35 to 44, and design 3, 31 to 39. So my 40 million isn't off too far. How are we going to afford? And the big question is I don't want us to have like what we just had previously, talking about in the waterfront, not being able to get all the projects done because we've run out of money. Okay, that's one of the key components that I sit and I look at. So, how are we gonna do this? And I've been a proponent, like Clint said, I'm a proponent of roundabouts, but what the schematics you've shown, Nathan, they're too cost prohibitive. They're way too cost prohibitive, especially with the funds we have available. So I guess that's my comment. Sorry, it's not more upbeat, but I think we have to address it from the reality of things.
I think it would also be interesting to review the cost, projected costs of the existing system transportation plan and see if we can adapt some of the, features from your design concepts as well. And I don't know if that can be merged somehow into something that's very achievable. Again, without really looking at each design concept and sort of hashing out the infrastructure costs, and trying to prioritize those traffic improvements and streetscape improvements in a way that makes sense. That's kind of where my thought process is going after Pat's comment. But
Well,
The city already is gonna, we do not but
right.
for the TSP, the city's already gonna be spending money on that. Can we take those funds and combine it with the urban renewal fund? That is part of it. That's kind of what you're
Some way, shape, or form, yeah.
I think, Nathan, you've done a good job summarizing everything, and I think you pretty much got a pretty good idea what people are looking for, and you're going to try to come up with something that, we're not going to make everybody happy. We can't afford to make everybody happy. We've got to do what's best for the community, and to me, it's safety, and to dress the Heights up, because I think the main reason that we got together 11 years ago was, downtown was finishing up its urban renewal, and the downtown was looking pretty good, and the Heights business district looked like a blight compared to downtown, and we wanted to drive the business up there. So, it's in your capable hands now. I guess the situation is that's what we're paying you the big bucks for.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that comes to mind for me thinking about, one, the cost, but also the investment at the intersections is it's still an ODOT corridor.
Yeah.
It would be good to better understand where they are and kind of the funding support that would come from ODOT, and sort of to kind of reduce the burden on on urban renewal and city funds. But I think regardless of what it is, it's a variety of funding sources that are coming together to make improvements. And I think there are opportunities, the numbers that were presented as those planning level ranges, those did not include kind of the other utility infrastructure items, replacing water lines, sewers. And it did make assumptions about, a kind of just to be simplified and do apples to apples, sort of an assumption that we're redoing all the streets along those blocks and kind of repaving everything. And is that the case? I don't know. But yeah, there are refinements and other things to look at. But I think, whether that impacts a decision that needs to be made regarding kind of the safety and the direction of streets in the heights and intersections in the heights is probably independent, but needs to be considered.
The one real positive thing in reading and reviewing was from the first responders' comments about being able to have the bicycle and sidewalk at the same elevation raised. Never even thought it occurred to me to do something like that for the access. And then I really look at it as you study it, when wintertime for snow removal and so forth, it would make that a lot easier and a lot more manageable. So anybody else got any other questions? Is there any questions from the three people in the audience that would like to ask Nathan anything? Randy, yes. Did you hear that, Nathan?
No.
Okay. Randy asked if we'd done any survey with the 80 some plus business owners on the heights on what they thought of the difference. So we'd have a direct correlation with the people that this really affects.
There was not a sort of independent or sortable survey response from the business owners.
Yeah, what we did is we walked the corridor, dropped cards at every single business that was open and welcoming to us, and encouraged those people and owners, operators, whether they were business owners or whether they were property owners, to participate in the open house so that we could really come together as community, not to just isolate one interest from another. I wanted to make sure the residents, and really this was very intentional, that the residents who live there had an appreciation for the businesses, had appreciation for through travelers and customers, rather than isolate them as independent groups. Like, this is a community open house, not an independent. So we went on the radio to talk to everyone. We asked surveys from everyone. But I did go to every one of those businesses on foot, dropping off cards, which still may be there, because they had very much an interest, and we wanted them to participate. We needed them to participate. They needed to participate. So, but not to participate as an independent group, participate as a part of the impacted community.
I would add, and this isn't feedback on the kind of design concepts that were developed, but towards the end of phase one, as we were talking about kind of parking and bike access, there was I think there was a recognition that we wanted to engage the business community more than we were able to with our initial stakeholder meetings. And I think some of the members of the advisory committee kind of reached out, and there was a letter and sort of a questionnaire that was circulated. And my recollection from that is that it was, I don't know if I would say 50-50, but pretty similar split to what we were hearing from the community. There are businesses that, prioritize people walking and biking to their businesses, probably equally so to the businesses that really needed to protect that one parking stall in front and kind of prioritize vehicular traffic. So that's sort of my sort of general recollection from some of the earlier feedback.
The only other, Jack isn't here, and I don't know if you saw his email or response and that, but part of, looking at the design of 12th and 13th, I think the cross streets need to be considered in what we're working towards forward. I think that'd be a way to pick up some extra parking spots, because that's the biggest comment that people have is pedestrian safety traffic flow and parking. Those are the three biggest things. So,
But also, we are really appreciative of the valuable insight that these type of studies and MIG's work is going to help, correlate the tax increment growth and what projects are achievable and how we can make a design really come together to serve the community and be a huge improvement that everybody is.
Nathan, do you have anything else? Dustin?
No, we're going to be before the agency board on Monday. I don't expect them to make any decisions then. In fact, the matter is set up for their discussion as well. So I expect us to come away with some comments from them and be happy to share that with you all, just based on what the agency has said and how they responded to the similar 350 pages. And then I would expect to go back to them probably in the following month, looking most likely for some. They're going to have the same response as you, I presume. Is this is a lot of information.
Yeah.
It would be helpful to have some time to process. I can only imagine they will want to process that as well, and much like you all. So we'll keep sharing some back and forth information on how things are proceeding.
Like
Yeah,
anything in the process, it's all discussion that helps come the vision.
Yes, Nathan.
Yeah, I was gonna say the one thing that I would just add, in the kind of bulk of the packet that you guys received, Appendix A, which was probably the 200-page version, that was the same evaluation summary that had been presented in February. So nothing changed from that. Just to I want to make sure everyone understood that was kind of a document that had completed, had been kind of presented to the Urban Renewal Agency previously, and it's just kind of there as sort of backup kind of reminder material. And then maybe the only question I have, or from a presentation standpoint, are there things that we should be spending more time talking about when we go to them on Monday, or things that I guess maybe gaps in the kind of material that was presented tonight to you that we should pull in?
Okay, anything else? Any additional information from members? Amanda?
Well, to answer Nathan's question, I don't think that I can't think of anything that was missing. I felt like it was really complete. And just wanted to, since I didn't throw out my thoughts, I just would say I think I agree with your recommendation to kind of pursue the hybrid third option. And I like that you kind of identified the places where it needs to be reworked or rethought a little bit. And I think that's really helpful because we all pretty much knew going into this, it wasn't going to be A, B, or C. It's going to be start with this and then tweak it. So it's nice to see like what exactly needs to be tweaked. But I think overall, the feeling I got from most of the people in person at the open house and looking at your charts and stuff is that the third option really does seem to have the most support overall. So starting place, start with that one. And then
Abby? Anything else? Clint? Are you still there? Okay, Nathan, you have anything else? Dustin?
No, thank you guys for your time and support throughout this process. And again, I think your guys' involvement for the open house was amazing, and I think it really resulted in the turnout that we got over the weekend.
The question I have for you, Nathan, did the open house meet or exceed what your expectations were? Oh, you're up.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it exceeded our expectations. There was definitely we think we're going to get a good turnout on a Friday night or Saturday, and I think the vision, and I'd really give the vision to kind of Dustin to really push for this community gathering event and opportunity to get people of different minds coming together was something that Dustin really pushed. And I think the staff and advisory committee, you guys did the legwork to make that happen. So yes, it exceeded our expectations. And it sets a high bar, and I don't think, Dustin's concern is, this isn't the type of outreach and engagement effort that's going to happen on every project, but it's great to see how important this project is to the community, to see that turnout.
Oh, if there's nothing else, meeting's adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer. Hopefully Russ has dinner on the table when you get home.
Thanks.